The Chief Fire Officers Association has worked with the government to lead and influence service reform. In 2015, it launched its new strategic plan, Making the Difference Needed, which set out how it would achieve greater effectiveness for the UK's fire and rescue services. Lucy Siegel joins us now from Westminster, where she is with CFOA Vice President Dave Etheridge.
Thank you, Natasha. And yes, the strategic plan Making the Difference Needed was launched in 2015, and I'm delighted that Dave is here to answer some more questions about that. Dave, hello. Thank you for joining me. How has the strategic plan been received by the government?
Well, I think it's fair to say that if you look at our strategy, Making the Difference Needed, that was published in 2015. And that contains various challenges and pledges from the Chief Fire Officers Association about taking forward fire and rescue services in the UK, including things like thinking nationally but acting locally. So, for example, we've been advocating the need for a national procurement strategy, for us to work together around national operational guidance, for example, to have a national research and development hub. And what was really refreshing for us to see was that in May 2016, when Theresa May, who was then the Home Secretary, when she gave her announcement around fire service reform, those three pillars that I've just mentioned there were an integral part of her speech. So I think it's great to say that the Chief Fire Officers Association was ahead of the game, and we're very much wanting to continue to push reforms within the United Kingdom.
Does it do what it says on the tin, make the difference needed?
Well, I think one of the most important things to remember is that the fire service has transformed over the last 15 to 20 years. We've gone from being a purely reactive service where we only moved when a 999 call came in to a really proactive risk reduction service. We're now working with partners, we're working across government, we're working locally with agencies, with the voluntary sector to understand risk, to drive down risk in society. As a result of that, what we've seen is 40% less fires and less fire deaths in this country. And if you look at the statistics in 1998, 8% of houses in the UK had a working smoke detector. Now we're at nearly 90%. Now that's a fantastic achievement and just goes to show how being a proactive service has made that difference needed.
Those are impressive statistics, but there's always room for improvement, isn't there?
Well, we can always do things better, and we certainly don't sit still. For example, if you look at some of the collaboration that we're now doing, we're doing some fantastic work now around the sharing of assets, the sharing of buildings. You no longer get a fire station being built or a police station being built. What we're seeing is community safety centres where we're working with police, fire, ambulance, local authorities, voluntary groups in those centres to make a difference locally to people and to make society safer.
Now, we know that in our communities we face a heightened state of emergency. How does the fire and rescue service fit into that?
Well, when you look at the role of a modern day fire and rescue service, it's just so wide-ranging and technical. And what we are, of course, is at the heart of local resilience forums. So we work collectively with police and ambulance and local authority colleagues at a local level, understanding what the local risk is, but of course also mapping that local risk to the national risk, which is identified by government. So when you mentioned earlier on about the change of threat, when you look at terrorism, when you look at wide-scale flooding, all of those are on our agenda. We have national operational policies that oversee them. They're implemented locally so that if something does occur, we can respond in a really cohesive way.
Now, when we hear about multifunctionality and co-responders and even tri-responders, some people become nervous and they think that the fire service is becoming diluted. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think one thing that's really important to remember is that there's one thing that unites all of the emergency services, which is the number 999. And when a member of public has their moment of need, has their moment of crisis, it's our role to work together to respond to that. And a great example now is where fire and rescue services up and down the UK are involved with co-responding with the ambulance service. So if an individual has a heart attack or if they're having respiratory difficulties, a call goes into the ambulance service, fire service resources can be mobilised. Those firefighters are trained, they've had enhanced level of trauma care, first aid training, generally delivered by the local ambulance service. That means that we can respond, we can provide that casualty with reassurance, initial first aid, whilst we await the professional paramedic colleagues to come and potentially continue that life-saving operation.
And how strong is the association's voice across the country?
Well, our role is to technically advise ministers. We are the subject matter experts when it comes to fire and rescue, and the massively broad role that we now have within society. Now, not only do we do that within England, but we also do it within Scotland, Northern Ireland, and indeed Wales. But I think a great example of what I'm talking about, in the times of a national emergency, when the government cobra is sitting, then we are able to provide that technical expertise, we're able to provide the advice to the ministers to make sure that we can resolve the incident and to get the country back to normality as quickly as we possibly can.
Dave, thank you so much for sharing that expertise and insight with us. Natasha, back to you in the studio.